Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about height and dick size. And yeah, that's literally what we're talking about today. Okay, so it's a long story, but okay. I've always had issues with my height. I've always hated my height. I've always, I've always not been particularly inclined to be like just under 5'2". Like on a good day, I'm 5'2". On an average day, I'm like 5'1.95". Like, I'm not even kidding, my guy. Like, I'm short, at least in my personal opinion. But then I hear people say, you're fine. You're like normal height. You're short, but not abnormally short. And I feel like it is the same thing for men with dick sizes that are suboptimal. Now, listen, you could say that it's big, and I'd probably believe you, because I have zero experience in that department. I feel like for women, it's like height, weight, boob and butt size to waist to hip ratio, all that kind of dealio bop. With guys, it's like muscles, dicks, that kind of stuff. And we're always so hyper focused on our appearances. So, in general, we always have something to pick flaw with over the course of time when we find ourselves developing, especially when we hit puberty or when we kind of like hit later stages in our life and maybe our looks start going downhill or we start looking kind of ugly and we get fat or we, lose some height or I don't know why I'm air quoting. These are two variables, like the getting fat over a course of time when you get older and the losing height thing is quite common. But in general, I feel like there are a lot of things we as individuals are insecure about, and some of it makes sense. Some of it does make sense. Like there are certain like levels of value we ascribe to certain looks because they make us more appealing and attractive in society and can, allow us to be more well liked, get more mates, things like that. So it makes sense as to why we would feel the pressure to uphold a certain level of physical standard that is considered the, ideal beauty standard. But personally, I have to point out there are a few things that really just don't matter. There are things that you just genetically cannot control, and if you can't control them, why change them? There are certain instances of time where you're gonna meet a dude who's got a really tiny dick, and like, if you love him, will the dick size actually matter? Like, how tiny is too tiny? Same with height. How short is this girl until it becomes incredibly inconvenient? What if you love her? Say she lost like a foot right now from her height. Would you still love her? What if she just suddenly, like, I don't know, got ugly? Like, super freaking ugly. Or, like, she stopped wearing makeup and that makes her ugly in the eyes of society? Now, I'm a great example of somebody in society who just doesn't try. Although I do have my insecurities. I personally don't like being as short as I am. I've kind of appealed to the futility of it because obviously I can't do anything to change it. I'm gonna be 5'2" or less forever. And, it's the same thing with dick size, bone structuring. There are certain things that you physically cannot control. Now, there is a difference between those things and being fat, in my opinion, getting fat. And, if you don't like the way I'm saying it, that's how I've always said it. That's how I've always been told. And you can say that sounds discriminant, but I'm not talking about, fat making you ugly. Some people look hot as hell when they're fat. But I'm not talking about fat being a bad word, fat making you ugly, because listen, you have excess body fat on you versus you are fat. It's the same thing. You're holding on to the extra. And listen, some people look really hot when they're fat. A girl with a few extra inches for me to pinch is probably on the good side, not the bad side. Guys like a little meat to grab, and honestly, I kind of do too. But in general, that is a connotator more of health than of look. Unless someone is super duper physically obese, like so much so that it is insanely unhealthy, a lot of people don't care. Like, if you have a good personality and you look cute or you try in other directions, people are not going to care if you're holding on to an extra 10, 20, 30 pounds. All right? Trust me, I've been there. I've had people ask me out when I've been bigger and smaller. I've had people avoid me when I've been bigger and smaller. It has very little to do, in my opinion, with, like, a body shape. Some people do find that to be an important variable for finding a mate. Personally, I would focus more on the health variable. So if somebody's becoming immobile due to their weight, or they don't like to exercise, or they don't like to eat healthy, that's an indicator of not being healthy. That's not just an indicator of being ugly. And I feel like we have a really bad perception of that right now, where everybody's worried about not looking good, and that's why they're trying to be healthy. They're like trying to exercise because they want a perfect body. They're not exercising because they want to be healthy. And we all fall into that stage sometimes. We all have that mindset. We all develop like certain perspectives about ourselves and things we have to do to uphold our own like physical well-being, our own physical demands, our own, looks. I'm actually a really bad example of this, to be completely honest, because I, like, the way I dress now is the way I've always dressed. I don't really wear a lot of girly stuff. I don't really wear makeup. Even with my job, I don't really wear makeup, even though it's literally said that we're supposed to. It's encouraged. I just don't. I'd rather look ugly because to me, it's just not worth the time. It's not worth like the breakouts. It's not worth the annoyance of having to go through all the trouble to actually, put on makeup. And trust me, it's not pretty when I put on makeup. It looks like mid at best, and then also I just sweat it off like 5 minutes later. But I say all of this mainly because I feel like we all have really twisted perceptions of what looks good and what doesn't look good in society. Like, people who have like this whole ideal of like getting a big dick, this whole idea that certain dudes have of like your like crotch size just isn't enough. You want to look bigger in the bedroom, things like that. I haven't really met anybody who cares about that, and I bet there are people who care, but like at the end of the day, most chicks don't care. Same thing with a girl having like an extra 10 pounds on her. A lot of dudes don't care. There's just more to grab onto. And listen, like some girls, they want to not have to deal with like which angle you're at or whatever. And the fact that I don't have any experience, I'm trying to explain sexual ramifications with bigger dick sizes is quite sad. You know what I mean though, in general, when it comes to like, physical features. The number one thing I really want to drive home is that as long as you endeavor to be healthy, you try to exercise, you try to eat healthy, you take care of yourself, that's way hotter than like somebody who's like got the ideal body and is going to die at the age of 30 because they're on steroids, or they get Brazilian butt lifts and starve themselves, or they do all whatever, or they have terrible diets, or they treat their bodies like human garbage, or whatever the case may be, or they eat tapeworm eggs to look skinny. Like, there's so much stuff, and it's like, what would you rather have? Would you rather have a long, forgiving life, but have a suboptimal body? What is considered to you a suboptimal body? Or would you rather, like, look perfect in the eyes of many and, like, hate your life and want to die anyways? And, be, like, depressed and live an unhealthy life? Because a lot of people, like, these are really unhealthy ideals I see online. Like, there's, like, that level of musculature that is not natural that people think is natural because they're so used to seeing it. It's because every guy's on steroids now. When it comes to Instagram, a lot of people Photoshop are on steroids. And, it's not everybody, but it's a good example. And then the same thing that goes with women who Photoshop themselves and they show their booty and they angle it just right and they go and do the whole dealio because they want you to see it so that you subscribe to whatever they got, their OnlyFans, their Patreon, their Instagrams, whatever. And like, listen, I've tried that before. I've looked hotter and I've looked uglier. Like in the eyes of many. Like I've tried and I've not tried. And at the end of the day, there's no point in really giving a shit. Maybe it's because as an individual, you might face rejection and then you'll either like try and glow up and like look hot and sexy, or you'll do the opposite and just appeal to futility and think you're ugly anyways. But I feel like the outcome is the same because you've still been rejected and then you're looking for some sort of like external factor to try and gratify you in some regard. Anyways, I know this is like a weird short video, but I just have to ask, like, does any of this really matter? Like, if you look at your future goals, is your future goal literally just to look good? Or is it to, like, be good? Is it to have good morals, good virtues? Is it to, expand yourself in a really cool regard? Is it to have a business of your own? Is it to do something exciting with your life, have a family, have friends? Maybe then you get into, like, a weird mindset where it's like, well, no one will ever love me when I look like this. And that means I'll never hit my ultimate goal of being jovial and having a great business because I won't be extroverted enough. And then on top of that, I'm also not going to be able to find anybody who ever wants to have sex with me. So I'll never have my own family. I'll never get married, blah, blah, blah. All because I don't look good. And it's like, yeah, some people will look at you that way. Some people will definitely not want to be with you because of the way you look. It's a commonality. Trust me when I say that it doesn't matter because somebody else is going to like you for you. It's really like so cheesy, but it's really quite true. If people are that shallow as to not want to be with you just due to the physical factors of your being, not to do with your health, your motivation, your perspective on life, your politics, your ideals, your morals, your values, your, goals for the future, they don't look at any of that and they just look at the way you look. Honestly, they're missing out on a very important variable in life. It's called perception. Perception versus reality, I guess. I don't know. I have to propose this. If somebody's really that petty, drop them. Drop them like a hat. You're not going to want them. They'll never be satisfied. They'll always be looking for the next fix. And honestly, I still have not met many of those people. I've met a few. I've met a few people that really are like that. And ironically, a lot of them have like weird contradictions. Like, it's ironic. Like, somebody who's like super fat is gonna be like, I'd never date a fat person. And maybe it's because you already know what you got and you don't like what you got, so you don't want to get more of it. But it's also the same thing where it's like, I don't want to date somebody who's less than 6 feet tall. Or I don't want to date somebody who's like this. Or I don't want to have sex with somebody who doesn't have anything, under a 7-inch wang. Or whatever the case is. Like, everybody's got their own petty thing. But at the end of the day, if you met like the perfect man or the perfect woman or whatever you're into, say it's the perfect person in every capacity, personality-wise. Say that they have everything about them that is like beyond the scope of what you could have imagined for a human being, but they have the number one flaw that you don't like physically. Like, they have like the flaw, like maybe they're not entirely ugly, but let's say they're ugly, or let's say they're fat, or let's say they're really short or weird, or they like, I don't know, whatever the case is. I was gonna say they smell bad, but that sounds like a hygiene issue and that doesn't sound very hot. But let's just say it's like a physical attribute that you just really don't like, that you've denounced your whole life. Would you drop them for that attribute? Personally, I don't think I would. It would have to be really bad for me to not want to go out with them. Like, and it would have to be a series of variables, because if it's like the perfect man, the perfect person out there for me, and it's like I just have to bite the bullet on this one thing, it's like a win. It's like most people pick flaw with their partners over time anyways. Most people get ugly, by the way, anyways. So listen, if you're ahead of the game, who cares? Like, by the end of like our 30s, we're all gonna go downhill. We're all gonna look like human garbage, like we came out of a waste bin, And you can't reduce, reuse, and recycle those kinds of people. Like, it's over by that point in time. We don't have like adrenochrome. So I tell you this because I feel like people have really warped perceptions when it comes to like bodies and what people will think of them, given that they're not the perfect person, bypassing what's considered the ideals, because it's variable in so many different countries. Some people want to look tan in the United States. In other foreign countries, they want lighter skin because they think that's the most perfect ideal. Some people want to be skinny in certain countries. Some people want to be fat in certain countries because it promotes wealth and health and beauty in both regards. It's completely subjective. We all have delusional and subjective viewpoints on what is and isn't hot. And guess what? Everything is not, and everything is. You can literally get off to anything. I've seen people get off to balloons before, so let's just be honest. There is literally no logical justification as to why you should let the way you look impair your perception of yourself and the future. You should always endeavor to be healthy. You should always endeavor to do what you need to do. You should always endeavor to develop yourself to be the optimal person you can possibly be, and health is one of the sexiest things ever, like I said. So at the end of the day, if you're considered ugly, trust me, you're probably not ugly. And if you are, who cares? People are assholes. Like, we've all been called something in our lives, whether it's ugly, whether it's a racial slur, whether it's fat, whether it's short, whether it's small dick, whether it's, weirdo, whatever the case is. Somebody's been calling you something at some point in your life, and maybe that's what's made you insecure. Is that one asshole going to perpetuate your entire perception of yourself and all of your goals for your entire life? I don't think so. So I'm really trying to drive home here. It doesn't matter. And I'm telling you this because I hear a lot of people talking about like, oh, I'm fat, and they're not even fat. Or, oh, I'm ugly, and they're not even ugly. And it's all just due to delusional self-perception. And, the other thing is, nobody cares. They're all too busy focusing on how ugly they are to focus on how ugly you are. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you could be ugly as sin, but someone hotter than you, could just be thinking about how ugly they are, People don't really care that much. Personality drives the point way more. Like, if you have an atrocious personality, people are going to pick flaw with you no matter what. They'll know you're ugly because, hey, you know what? Even if you aren't really ugly, you have an ugly personality, and that kind of, like, permeates the rest of your being. Like, it's, like, stuff like that. Like, I've seen people hate people for their personalities and the things they've done way more than for their looks. Their looks just kind of compound or like dismantle some of the other variables depending on the perception of the individual who judges them. And that's the thing, is in society we have this weird fear of judgment. It's like, that whole like story about people being like, man's worst fear is public speaking. Well, I actually think that man's worst fear is judgment. You fear being, completely absconded by society. You fear everybody else placing their verdict upon you just to think that you are inferior because of a variable that you may or may not be able to control. You might be completely outcasted. You might be hated by all, loathed by many. like deplete of all joy because you'll be forever alone. Like I feel like the fear of judgment is the number one most scary thing for most people. We fear being judged all the time. I don't think people fear death as much. I don't think people fear, being mutilated as much as they do being judged. So if you can bypass such a like delusional level of fear and just be you, you're probably ahead of the game, and nobody's gonna care no matter what flaws you have in a physical sense. So anyways, that's the video. I just wanted to talk about that. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, everybody. It has been lovely, and I will see you next time. Slater.